Hi, everybody. Audrey Fezzik here. Wanted to quickly share with you a little bit of information about the District 1 Parks and Rec meeting that I attended back on December 11th at 6 p.m. And it was hosted by Tammy Good and Mark Boudreau. Mark Boudreau is the Director of Parks and Rec and was hosting a bunch of different meetings across different districts in Pompano Beach to begin the process about asking folks what they were looking for in the needed park updates. So I'm going to show you what I received as well. Okay. So this was the Parks and Recreation Department Parks Master Plan update. This was the public meeting, and one of the architects for the project that's working on the master plan with everybody was also attending the meeting and was presenting these slides. So wanted to make sure you understand this. Now, one of the things that was addressed by Tammy Good was that the last time we had a master plan for the parks, it's going to be alliterative, it was back in 2013. And it was a report that included all parks in the city. They changed things. They updated a lot of things in the parks, and including things that are still being done today with Go Bond projects. It's obviously now almost 2025, so we are absolutely in need of some updates to our parks. And this meeting was called specifically to allow residents the opportunity to have that conversation with Tammy, City of Pompano Beach staff, and Mark and the architects to start to gather information related to how you are using these parks. And so there will be more information to come soon. We had a conversation about they have a survey, but we had a conversation about individualizing these surveys, and I'll go into that a little bit more later. But just as a kickoff, this is what it is, and this is part of the reason why they want to start doing things and get your input regarding this. It's time to not just update, but then at the same time standardize the park furnishings. So benches, waste receptacles, light fixtures, etc. One of the biggest thing is that they're looking at is obviously with the homeless or unhoused issues that we are dealing with in the city. Some of the benches, they're thinking about making them the ones that are not as comfortable to sleep on, with, sort of, if you've seen them with like sort of the bars in the middle, or so that the gaps. So it's not something you're not going to lay down on. They would like your feedback on that. Replacing picnic tables, grills, updating these things, standardizing all the signs to make them pretty and beautiful. Shade cover, playgrounds. These are all things that can be done. And then even enhancing lighting to make sure that it's for safety issues, making sure that there's some low level lighting so that police officers or pedestrians, if it happens to be dark, you'll be able to see if there's somebody in the park or not. So trying to just figure out how best to update and modernize the park, not the park, but the parks in our district, in order to make them work better for us in years to come. Okay. This is a large list. The Pompano Beach is big, obviously. But there's 53 existing parks in the city's inventory. 27 of them are outdoor. 27 outdoor parks are included in this update across the city, and there's even a proposed new park site. On top of that, this is for the overall park. On top of this, they've identified. They do inventory, but they've identified certain parks in our district, specifically to District 1. But so they're going through all of this, and I'm going to click through this one really quick because this is kind of how they're going to workshop this together, right? So they're going to be doing, oops, let me go back. They're going to be doing all of this in the next few months. And so it's really important that you provide as much data or information and conversations about how you're using each individual park, things you'd like to see, things you think you don't want to see, perhaps. And then that way, this all adds to what they can do together, and how they can work with the architect and really try to get this plan together. But with your input. So this is step one of probably 10, but this is why it's so important for you to be a part of this conversation starting now. And then we'll keep going from there. So in District 1, there are 13 existing parks in our district, and there's 6 included in this update for master park planning. So I know a lot has been done by the beach, and it's beautiful. So the 6 parks that they identified to be part of this master plan update for Parks and Rec is Marine Drive Park, Scott A. Winters Memorial Park, Indian Mountain Park, Lake Santa Barbara Park, Harbor's Edge Park, and Allsdorf Park, the boat launch. So we'll start with Marine Drive Park. One of the things that's really interesting here is that they pointed out during the meeting that these parking spaces here somewhat tend to be outdated, underused, and so there's going to be 2 different types of views on this. They took some pictures of an overview, so you can see it from like a bird's eye view from like Google, and then you'll also be able to see some other pictures that they've included. So for this particular, we sat on this slide for a while and talked about some of the things in this park specifically. So it's on the Intercoastal. It's right there on Riverside Drive at 1751 North Riverside Drive. It's primarily used as what they were telling us, and neighbors were telling me as well, primarily used by the people who live right around there. There's not a whole lot going on in the park in terms of, it's a great little place to kind of, if you're walking, people will stop, hang out in the park, maybe grab lunch, hang out at the park. There's not a lot of car traffic from what we were told, so we may or may not need to use all of these parking spaces. In fact, the conversation was, if we would like more green space, we could potentially talk about either eliminating or reducing the number of spaces there, because as the neighbors were saying, in this particular park, most people who access and use this park on a regular basis are walking to it. So one of the other things that they talked about was that there are currently 2 picnic tables and 3 benches, and we talked about other things that you might like to see in this park. Do we need both? I'm sorry, there's 3 picnic tables and 3 benches. Do we need all 3 picnic tables? Do we only need 2? Would we like something else? Would we not? So more foliage, trees, covered spaces. I mean, the world is your oyster somewhat when it comes to the updates in this park. So if you are an active user of this park, then one of the things that would be something you could suggest would be something that you would want to see at that park. So I know during the meeting, it was also brought up that some people were interested in maybe like a small landscaping that also included something that was butterfly friendly. Another item that came up was something related to a small gardening plots, or something that the community could take more interest in. So these are all ideas that were being thrown around, and they're all good ideas. Like I said, this is a whiteboarding concept of a park, so that's why I wanted to show you this. So this is the second park. And then this is Scott A. Winters Memorial Park. And this is, again, on North Riverside Drive, just pretty much right at Northeast 12th Street. Now this park obviously is a little bit bigger. There's lots of green space there, and there's parking as well. This park is going to be, if I remember correctly, a water taxi stop. So the conversation began more about how are we going to use this park. And since this park is also going to be a gateway to our city for people who may be coming in, riding the water taxi, we wanted to make this park a little bit more inviting. And that was one of the things that were addressed. So since there is a water taxi stop here, it's a great way to have, pick up, drop off location. There is ample parking. There's lots of good green space, but since it is going to be a water taxi stop, and there may be some times when people are walking or we're waiting and for things to get picked up by the water taxi, that we would want to make sure that there was possibly a little covered space or something, or some green tree canopy, whatever it may be, so that while people are waiting, if it happens to start raining or whatever, there's at least a little break from the direct sun or the rain. So wanted to make sure that I conveyed that to you. We did talk an awful lot about the importance of maintaining open green space. I know that they said in every park that they're planning on updating to include doggy bags, and so for anybody who's walking their dog, to encourage them to, obviously, those little doggy doo-doo bags, to encourage them, if they didn't bring their own, to make sure that they pick up after their puppies. The neighborhood and the residents who did attend the meeting talked again here about additional tree canopy. One woman I thought was a great idea along this walkway here along the Intracoastal, because it's going to be a water taxi stop. She even mentioned something about a possible sea bench, like a seawall bench, so that there's additional seating that sort of lines the seawall. And it's sort of a passive way, because it's part of the concrete, sort of a passive way to add additional seating or somewhere where people can kind of hang out and enjoy. So those are another great idea, more great ideas. You can see that this park is also really, really wide open. There's a lot of great just open green space here. So it's a fun place for people to run around, kids to run around. And so we talked about different areas where there may be additional opportunities for some flowering, or even informational pieces. I think somebody else brought up that people would be able to share interesting tidbits or something that's educational, but also interactive with parks. And we talked about that later on in the meeting, about trying to incorporate that into each one of the parks and each one of the water taxi stops also. So people could be educated about the history of Pompano Beach, maybe educated about something that's interesting in the city. We talked about doing a scavenger hunt of some kind to make it an educational, informative, and fun way to do something while you're either waiting for the water taxi, or you are just hanging out at the park, or you may be just visiting. So again, we also know that this park is actively used by neighbors, and wanted to ensure that they have the most amount of input. So if you live nearby this park, or you actively using this park, we talked about lighting again, being updated, and even like low level lighting. Again, nothing too bright, nothing like a football field. We were talking more about landscape lighting and low level lighting. And it was brought up multiple times about dark sky initiatives to make sure that we try to be a safe haven. So we have minimal lighting at night, but just enough to maintain park safety, and make sure that everything is safe for everybody. So input there would also be welcomed. The next park is Indian Mountain Park, and this is on the southeast side, if you're not familiar, of Atlantic. So it's southeast 13th Street and the Intracoastal. It's really not the Intracoastal technically, because it's sort of like an offshoot. If you are familiar with boating, it's sort of where Lake Santa Barbara, if you go, is across the Intracoastal, and then there's again that little wide area. So this is just off the Intracoastal, if you will, just before it kind of gets to the canal. And so it's in a very residential area. The round thing you see there is an older pavilion, I believe. And let's see, there are some updates that need to be made to this park as well. Years ago, we mentioned that years ago there were some placards that were issued for memorial trees there, and those are all going to be updated and readdressed and remade, I think, at some point. Now, again, this is going to be also one of the water taxi stops. So it's important for us to make sure that this is something that really showcases Pompano Beach and this particular area of Pompano Beach. Again, this is where we talked about adding the historical markers and making something interactive. So again, more foliage. We talked about possibly adding something that's more flowering, wanting to try to make these parks a little bit more lush greenscapes rather than just wide open green space, and also wanted to make sure that they kind of gave back to some of the greenery we were missing with a lot of our development. So want to make all of our parks a little showpiece for Pompano, and introduce people who may not have visited Pompano before to how great our city is, but also make sure that it lines up with how residents would like to use the park. So different amenities they may or may not want to see in their park. So this is closer picture of the waterway side. So you can see it's kind of like wide open to the Intracoastal there. behind the tree is where you could actually see the Intracoastal on the left. And so there is, again, an opportunity here to add your input. On the other side, so now we're at park number 4, Lake Santa Barbara Park, and I'm whipping right through this because I just wanted to get you the information. This is again a smaller park. This is on, if you go west, just east of Federal and southeast 7th Street, tucked into the neighborhood. There's just Lake Santa Barbara Park, which of course then looks out over Lake Santa Barbara. It is a very small park, and it is primarily used for residents that are just walking there. So there's I don't know that there's a lot of parking space. We saw at one point, I think they had a picture of it. No, they didn't have a picture of the parking space, but we talked about it. They just said that there was one opportunity to, they have a lift station there, or a lift station there, I think. And so there was one parking space for city employees to be able to use, but most people were telling us that it's mostly a neighborhood activated park. I know a few residents that take their dog, that walk their dog in the morning, every morning, and they walk all the way from where they do live to this park. And then they turn around, they sit and have their cup of coffee, and then they go home. So if you do live in this neighborhood and you are interested in seeing something additional added to the park that you can enjoy with your family, or you see a benefit, then please let us know. Again, lighting is something we talked about, minimal because it is in a residential area. But we wanted to also, I believe we did talk about at Lake Santa Barbara Park, there was some concerns from residents that some of the people who had been mooring in Lake Santa Barbara were using this particular point to, kayak in from their boat, drop their stuff, and then go back. So Parks and Rec is looking to clean that up. They've already done a lot of work in that arena, but the opportunity to make that not happen is also there. Trying to think what else we talked about. But again, there's not much in this park. So if there's something that you think you would appreciate, use, enjoy as part of this park and this beautiful space, then please make sure you submit some feedback to Parks and Rec. And like I said, anything goes. So if as you're thinking through these things, then make sure that you add your input. The 5th park is Harbor's Edge Park, which is again tucked away between Northeast 28th Avenue and just on the west side of the Intracoastal. So it's just south of 14th Street Bridge, and it is pretty much a wide open green space that neighbors really love. And in fact, one of the things that was brought up regarding this park, it's over 8.5 acres. So it's a really great space. A lot of people didn't even know that this park exists. And Tammy joked that, yeah, I think a lot of neighbors are happy that most people don't even know this park exists, because it is a very quiet, it's in a neighborhood setting. It's very quiet. It is very enjoyable. There is the Intracoastal right there, and there's a small little beach area. People walk, run there. We talked about there being, if you can see, in these little dark spaces here, and I think here, there's some very old style and outdated at this point fitness equipment that is kind of like those pull-up bars or a stretch area or something along those lines. So you can kind of see them in this picture here. We talked about, trying to make sure that we increased the foliage, maybe just pruned things, clean things up. And for the most part, this is the old fitness equipment. For the most part, the feedback related to this one was more that most residents that Tammy had already spoken to had said something along the lines that they like this park almost just as it is. So if you live in the neighborhood and you use this park and that does not align, then please let me know. And obviously we will be upgrading equipment. I know we talked about updating some of the playground equipment as well. And so just kind of fixing it up a little bit and bringing it up to bonded standards that would make this park last for another good number of years, and in almost the same fashion that it is now. And this is sort of by the water. You can see there's 14th Street Bridge and rocks. So we talked about just cleaning things up, making sure that there's the best use possible for this park. There's not a lot of parking there. It is a quiet park, but it is somewhere that I know is very much enjoyable for people to use. and it's a nice little hideaway park, so. The last one is Allsdorf Park and Boat Launch. And so when we talked about this one, again, if you're familiar with this one, this is 14th Street here. There's the drawbridge, Intercoastal. And of course, this park there's a little playground right here and parking. Now, this part of the park is, you can see the striping from here, this is more of the newer side of the park. And then back here where the boat launch is sort of, the concrete needs to be redone. It needs to be repaved as part of the repaving with new modern standards. And there's going to be a little bit more landscaping dividers, so it won't be so wide open in terms of a gigantic parking lot. We did talk about some lighting. Mainly, there's a structure here, I think, that was the old Coast Guard trailer. I have to figure out exactly what it is in this map, but we talked about that getting removed because it was at the end of its life, actually beyond the end of its life. We talked about the playground, and one of the things I know a resident had mentioned to me during the campaign season was that they were concerned about the traffic with 14th, and sometimes there were cars that were kind of coming over the bridge. So we talked about potentially putting a buffer zone between the playground, which is going back, but playground is sort of hidden right here. And then the bridge traffic. So trying to put a little bit of a natural barrier or buffer, maybe it doesn't have to be a fence, but maybe some large trees or an additional buffer zone so that if any car did come off the road at some point, or there was some sort of vehicular mess, it wouldn't be so close to the playground area. Again, just updating of playgrounds and amenities. You can see there's some picnic tables here. And I would invite you, if there's something you want to add to the park information, or you want to just go to these parks and go stand there in person, go observe them if you don't know, or if you're not actively paying attention to what you think you might like to see in these parks. This is, of course, there was an updated dock, or updated seawall and dock. And when they did raise the seawall to new standards, then what they did is they also added a floating dock for that. They also added a floating dock for those who use this with a kayak. So you can't see it in this picture, I don't think, but it is there. So these are the boat ramps. And again, those just things that need to be updated. So little bits and pieces of your part. So that is what I have for you. It says thank you for your participation. I wanted to make sure that you were aware of, this was the old survey. So we're going to scratch that, but that was the old survey. It's coming soon, and I will post very soon as I get the information from everybody when they set it up. We talked about making the information available related to each one of these parks. We talked about signage to have a survey and QR code at each park so that you would be able to take the survey. If you're an active user of these parks, you'd be able to take the survey and be able to have it be site specific to that park. So we had that conversation so that people who are already using this park on a daily basis, they may see a sign come up with a park specific survey, so that they're encouraged to add their input. And then that way, they'll be able to collect the most amount of data from not just people who have an opinion and happen to be seeing my video or happen to attend a meeting, but also people who are active users of that park, whether they live in District 1 or they live in District 2, 3, 4, or 5. So we want to make sure that we're completely inclusive to who's using the park and how it's being used for each one of these parks that is going to be updated. As always, if you have any questions, concerns, please feel free to reach out and contact me. I have my email listed below and my cell number. You can call or text if you have any questions. I am more than happy to put you in touch with Mark Boudreau and Tammy Good, and I can make sure that you get all the information you need if you would like to add your input. So thank you so much for watching. I appreciate it, and I will chat with you guys again soon. Figure out how I'm going to stop my recording now.